to talk a little bit about what's coming in North Carolina because, Pat, this is another state where not only do we have professional sports, but again, we have a very strong collegiate sports culture in the state of North Carolina. The online betting bill was passed and signed earlier this year, and then we saw some things happen with machinations with the budget where what we had been looking toward as a January 2024 launch, there at least were some questions as to whether that timeline could be maintained.
Yeah, first thing to put out is to remind everyone that there are retail sports books at tribal casinos, 3 of them in North Carolina. So there is sports betting in North Carolina. It's just not online yet. To your point, Governor Cooper signed it back in, I think it was June. And I think we were all kind of scratching our head, like, why is this taking so long to get any sort of thing rolling? You know, a few things happened. They hired an executive director of sports betting who's leading that process, but that was about it. You know, every time I contacted the lottery down there, which is running this, they kind of gave a vague response, but they promised that they were going to launch as soon as January 8th, which is the first day they can implement it as possible. And then the North Carolina budget process rolled around last month, and they kind of completely changed the framework to how sports books will enter the state. Before it was untethered. They would get some preference if they were going to have an in-person sports book partnership with a professional sports organization, that's the pro teams or golf course or racetrack. And then it got kind of thrown into the wood chipper, I guess, or I guess not. I don't know how you'd kind of describe it, but to actually officially tether them, and nobody will take responsibility for this. And I think that was one of the weirdest things. I could not pin down anybody to say, yeah, it was me. There were a lot of local reporters down there talking to legislators. They all had no idea where it came from, even the people in charge of the budget, which that seems weird. I talked to industry sources. They pointed all sorts of different directions. I had somebody point at NASCAR eventually, who they didn't want to talk about it. Had somebody else come back and say, well, it wasn't NASCAR, but it might have been the tracks, which then is still kind of NASCAR. And the language does clarify it so NASCAR and PGA Tour get license control. So those two are kind of suspicious when you think about it from that angle. But who ultimately put it in the budget, we still don't know. But anyway, there was a meeting at the lottery last week, and rather than the as soon as possible to January 8th language, they changed it to hopefully we can get it going by June 14th, which is the latest possible in the law to launch. And so I think that shift just on its own tells you that they're expecting some delays, which I guess makes sense, but also doesn't, because we saw, how quickly Kentucky was able to get up to launch this year. So, but again, the states all take their own time with the regulatory process. I mean, we're still waiting on Maine. It's been a process. So,
I forgot Vermont, Maine. I haven't heard any of these things recently.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how quickly they go. I think maybe they saw something like this was coming, so maybe they didn't work as hard as possible from the get-go, and now they will really try to go, pedal to the metal to get it out. But it's going to be interesting to see once that kind of irons out how quickly they can get it launched.
I know that those of a certain faith would know when we talk about the Immaculate Conception. I think this is the Immaculate Legislation. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows who put it in. Nobody knows how it got there. But somehow a bill that became a law that was settled, signed, good to go, essentially got reopened within the budget process here. For those who do not follow this closely, and I'm sure most of you who listen to this podcast follow these things closely, but if you happen to be sharing this with your friends and family, this is not normal in any way. We have not seen a lot of this, not only in sports betting legislation. I worked in politics for a long time. This is not a normal course of action for a bill to undergo this set of changes. And so I think Pat laid it out very well in terms of who could be interested in this. It certainly wasn't the sports books, put it that way. They are not looking for any sort of extra middleman to have to deal with within this process. when they were just going to have a certain fee set by the state. We pay for our license, we go through it, and we start. Now, if you have to go through and deal with a track, a golf course, a professional team, well, that's a negotiation, and you have no idea what that fee might ultimately look like to be able to operate through one of those licenses. So from January 2014 and a Super Bowl launch to June of 2014, and I don't know, there's no professional baseball in North Carolina, so I don't know.
Adam, I think you went back 10 years. I think we're in 2013 now.
Here's the thing. No, Pat, I'm so old that I say things like 2014, and it sounds perfectly normal to me.
I'm right there with you, but, you know.
This is like the discussion we had separately on the LSR Slack about the old show Talk Soup, which I was convinced had gone off the air like 5 or 10 years ago, and I think it had been 25 years since it was there. So I keep you guys around to not only to keep me young, but when I have my senile old man moments like that, I appreciate you picking up the slack. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Sam, will you be re-listening to the podcast to hear your voice?
Yeah, absolutely. I love hearing myself talk. I can never get enough. So I'm going to do that every opportunity I get. Plus, just to catch up on all the stuff we talked about, you know, catching up on North Carolina, Kentucky, NCAA, DFS operators. It was quite a mix today.
We did. We went for a little frito misto, and I think we made a delicious meal out of the whole thing. Everyone, thanks for joining us here on the LSR podcast for episode number 210. Hey, we're going to be at the G2E convention in Las Vegas. I'll be making a brief appearance, but Sam and Pat will be there the whole week. If you see them on the floor, stop by and say hi. They'd love to chat and talk a little LSR with you. For Pat and for Sam's first appearance, I'm Adam. We'll see you next week.